Wow.
But there's a lot to factor in here. I mean, the sun might have broken out of the clouds, and some of the regular activity from fishermen to a lot of the kiosks selling meat are back online. But there's still a lot of soul searching after the pollsters got it wrong. Clearly, the equity market was positioned as well for a different outcome. The first round results with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan showing resilience and strength on his nationalist platform with 49.4% of the vote, 99% of the vote counted, takes us to a second round potentially on May 28th. The key thing to remember,
Good morning, good morning.
he's actually going to be in a stronger position for round two than he was in round one. And that is because parliamentary numbers speak in his favor.
Finansvisen, de bommer jo helt av, aner ikke. Markedet skal ned.
Who had 5.3% of the first round vote, those votes need to get reallocated in the second round, and the thinking on the ground is, based on the conversations I've had with many experts, is there is a higher chance of those votes going to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So that leaves us in a situation
Nå tredje dagsen.
likelihood that we can see more of the status quo, even though the economy is reeling and bursting at the seams in terms of pain and trauma, in terms of flows.
So, Yusuf, how are we thinking then about market reaction as we look ahead potentially to 2 weeks of volatility out of Istanbul? We checked in, of course, in the equity market reaction. You say that they were probably priced around the polling, and as you rightly point out, the polling seems to have come in dead wrong at this point. The market reaction then over the next few weeks, Yusuf?
Yeah, so there are a few fronts that we're keeping an eye on. I mean, you have the equity front, which we'll continue to monitor over the next few hours. Dollar lira is always going to be a tricky one. It's a little bit short on liquidity, and at the same time, the central bank. I mean, this is again based on some of the reporting that we've done. People familiar with the matter. The central bank has already intervened and is going to continue to micromanage that. So what you're seeing in dollar lira, yes, it's a 2-month low, but it's not really the full scale of the pain. And then on the other side of that, on the credit default swaps side, we saw a move higher by about 70 basis points. That gives you a bit of an indication that there is concern about this lingering uncertainty over the next 2 weeks. And then if President Recep Tayyip Erdogan continues to reassert and establish himself for another 5 years, so you're looking at a total term of 25 years, a quarter of a century, what does that mean for an economy that can't handle unorthodox economic policies anymore? I was just catching up with OMG Capital Advisors.
Det som skjer nå er at du har oljeprisen som har dratt ned ganske mye, commodities og råvarer ned, negativt for Oslo Børs, positivt for resten av verden.
Okay, Yusuf, great reporting. Thank you for us, of course, live in Istanbul on such a consequential vote for the people of Turkey globally as well, in the region. Let's get back to what's happening in the politics of the US. President Biden says debt ceiling talks are moving along. The US president is set to meet with Speaker Kevin McCarthy and other congressional leaders tomorrow. Bloomberg's latest MLive Pulse survey looks at what investors will buy if the US hits the debt ceiling.
Now is probably not the absolute best time to jump in.
It comes right down to the wire.
As we get to the 11th hour, the volatility spikes and equity markets can correct.
Markets get volatile, maybe the stock market go down.
You don't want to position and add to equities right ahead of that.
The only way we can play this is to stand back, be careful.
Buy a 1 month, 2 month Treasury bill.
There is a huge flight to safety.
A lot of defensive sectors look high priced.
Safety trade has become big tech again.
Investors continue to seek shelter there.
And I'm not sure it's as safe as it looks.
I wouldn't want to try and get too cute around timing my portfolio based on the whims of a handful of politicians in Washington.
Okay, joining us now is Yari Sten, Goldman Sachs' chief European economist. Yari, good morning. Thank you for joining us in the studio. Let's start with the debt ceiling risks then and how that links into your views on the European economy. How would you quantify the risks around the US debt ceiling at this point?
Well, it's a fluid situation as we just heard. I think significant
På dags nå så ligger vi helt ligger vi helt på støttenivå. Så her kan du bryte rett opp, og du kan komme rett ned. Det ligger akkurat og balanserer. Og så på RSI-en også, så ligger RSI-en også stanger, så man må se an litt hva man gjør for noe. For du har oljepris og råvarepris som er ganske bra ned. Du har blanding i Asia. Oslo Børs vil nok reagere på at oljeprisen har falt med nesten 2% fra fredag. Falt ganske kraftig. Mens Europa har jo egentlig bare gått av at commodities kommer ned. Og så er det fokus på gjeldstakene i Ukraina. Det er liksom det er fokus på. Og akkurat nå på Dagsen så ligger den helt vannrett på støtta her nå. Jeg tenkte også å kjøre safe trades i dag, og ikke kjøre helt galskap scalping. Så her, nå kan den komme ned.
But I think the broader driver of the European economy are really going to be the things in Europe, the gas crisis, the issues of reopening in China and the effects on growth here. And then, of course, the tightening process of the ECB. So I think those are really going to shape the European outlook much more at this stage.
Yeah, we certainly want to unpack your views on where the ECB goes from here in the next few minutes. But I just want to start on, or continue along the US lines, around the dollar particularly. It had a very good week last week on some of these geopolitical risks. If we get to a point where the Fed is on pause, maybe a bit of a softer dollar, how does that read across for the European economy and European corporates?
Yeah, I think the euro obviously is one of the very important drivers of the cycle. We have generally seen a significant appreciation of the euro relative to where we were a few months ago. But then again, we have to see it in the context of the long weakening that we saw in the run-up to that. And I think current levels of the euro are still below where you would put a normal exchange rate of the euro against the dollar. So I think there's a slight headwind in the pipeline from the strengthening we've seen over the last few months. But again, I don't think it's one of the key drivers at the moment. I think inflation that's falling, China that's reopening, credit that's tight.
Nei, jeg måtte gjøre det, for jeg tok jo svært tap på fredag. Jeg måtte midt i trade, så måtte jeg kjøre og så hente, så står en dust og ser på meg, så jeg måtte bare gå fra alt oppe. Og så var jeg så tjukk i at jeg lukket ikke posisjonene mine. Jeg bare tenkte, det går bra. Og så kom jeg tilbake og så bare, faen, alt gikk i stopplås. Så i dag så skal jeg bygge opp. Sakte, men sikkert. Så skal det hver dag.
Because the numbers in China, of course, have been very strong, but at the same time, it's mainly services driven, and we know that the spillovers from stronger services activity are smaller than from traditional industrial activity.
Takk skal Erik. Ja, jeg fikser det så lenge jeg kan sitte her og ikke ha folk som kommer inn på rommet og sitter og skal tulle og prate. Da går det fint. Så nå har jeg byttet lås ute, ny lås ute, ringeklokke med kamera, alt til rette for at ingen skal forstyrre meg på tradinga mi, ordne nytt telefonnummer nå, og jeg kan trade uten å måtte ha han dusten komme hit og prate med seg, sitter her og fy faen, hva synes du tatoveringen min? Jeg gir faen i tatoveringen din. Så nå er det kun full fokus på trening her. Satt en short akkurat nå.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in some of those European economies, the divergence between services and manufacturing is quite pronounced, isn't it? But Yali, great to get your thoughts. We're going to get you to stick around. We'll get your views on the ECB, how to manage some of these risks, and where that rate hike trajectory goes from the European Central Bank just in the next couple of minutes. Yari Sten, of course, of Goldman Sachs, staying with us. Just a redhead crossing the terminal, a couple of lines coming through. One in terms of deal-making, or deal-making that isn't happening. This is Wood Group here in the UK.
Det ikke noe tydelig retning helt ennå, men det sånn 50-50, men hvis ikke han klarer å holde støtteren nå, så detter han. Han må liksom gikk opp for at den skal gå. Så jeg vil dere sette en uten der nå.
in the session this morning. And then, of course, we're monitoring those shares, those companies that have exposure to the Turkey story. We saw the benchmark over in Turkey taking a big hit, falling around 6%. On the back of the news that it's likely that vote to go to a second round, the uncertainty around the politics of Turkey. BBVA, the Spanish bank, of course, with the linkages to Turkey and the impact there, currently down close to 4% on the back of that story. We keep across, of course, the developments in Turkey.
Klarer han å stoppe oss nå, eller?
Throughout this hour. Coming up, economists give their forecast for the ECB rate path, and it looks like it is higher rates for longer.
Ta gevinst på shorten nå.
Inflation. We get the Goldman Sachs take in the next few minutes. This is Bloomberg.
Han er akkurat på den streken her. Ta gevinst. Nå, ute. Det er bare en liten short igjen. Transactions der. Faen, jeg shorta Nasdaq. Det er faen jeg vet det. Jeg er short på Nasdaq og short på Daxen. Jeg tror det bare var short Daxen, jeg. Faen, ass. Ja, så spiller ingen rolle. Jeg tjente penger på det i hvert fall. Faen. Jeg må close Nasdaqen min når jeg trader på Daxen, ass. Jeg trykker jo på feil indeks. Ja, jeg er short i hvert fall. Jeg er short her da. Fy faen. Det er bra de følger hverandre. SMS-en har gått ut i dag tidlig, den. Ja, han siste shorten der. Her er det jeg har solgt hvis jeg var dere. Nå prøver han å liksom holdt støtta seg her. Her er støtta. Han må blåse ned der. Nå går jeg i penga. Man må blappre gjennom her. Kom inn an den lille... Der, ja. Nå er jeg penga. Jeg var short der oppe, men det var da Nasdaq. Så jeg shortet feil indeks. Nå er jeg short Daxen. Kul med betaling. Det skal gå av seg selv da, kompis.
The fastest numbers and analysis you trust.
Welcome back. Economists polled by Bloomberg expect the ECB not to cut rates until the second quarter of 2024. They say the euro
Nei, tredje ikke gjennom AS. Kjøre ny short. Klarte akkurat ikke motstanden. Gjør en gang til. Kjøre tight stop loss.
In terms of how far the ECB is going to have to go, how many more hikes are in the pipeline, and what is that going to do to the Eurozone economy?
Yeah, so they slowed down to 25 basis points.
Hvorfor viser han ikke?
Basically said there's more ground to cover because inflation is still too high. There's still underlying.
Hvorfor viser han ikke?
The labor market that
Hva skjer her da?
growth is more resilient than we thought. So to us it means that there are two more rate hikes coming.
Det er ikke så rart det da. Jeg har på feil chart. For faen. US Tech. Er det mulig? Det er ikke rart at vi kuker da. Se på Nasdaq. For faen, dere handler Daxen og ser på Nasdaq. Det var jævla smart da. Helvete, ass.
for them to turn around.
Og så tjener jeg penger. Det er jo helt spesielt, da.
They said at 375 until the end of 2024.
That's the base case.
Det er ikke rart jeg ikke skjønte en dritt her.
Still have a very tight labor
Jeg
market. Wage
tror
growth
jeg må
is
ha hjelp med
accelerating.
PC, altså.
And I think what is interesting in the euro area is that the institutional wage setting setup essentially means that the wage pressures tend to be more persistent than, for example, in the US, where wage growth is celebrated earlier, but has already slowed quite a bit now.
Jeg har sånn egen sånn mappe hvor jeg har alle mine grafer i. Så trykker jeg alltid på feil da, når jeg skal ta og sette opp grafene, for jeg skal gjøre det så jævla fort.
Significant tightening of credit conditions, and that is going to slow growth in coming months, particularly via the housing market.
Da kan jeg betrygge dere med at det skal falle videre. Shorte med nå.
To the rate level, the drag should start to diminish, and we also have some positive things in Europe. The big drop in headline inflation that's coming that should support consumer spending. There's still quite a lot of saving in the economy, and so we think there's quite a bit of resilience in the economy despite these rate hikes.
Are you starting to see, or when do you expect to see a material and sustainable?
Litt lettere å treffe med riktig chart, for å si det sånn.
Well, we think we've started to see the beginning of it. I mean, we had the first time a small tick down in the year-over-year inflation rate, and we think that decline will continue, particularly as goods prices cool. And that's, of course, something we've seen in the US, something we've seen globally. The key concern really is around services inflation, which is tied to wage growth, which in turn is tied to the strength of the labor market. And we think that part of inflation will be stickier, and therefore it will take some time for core inflation to go down. So we do have it falling for sure, but it is falling relatively gradually, and it's still above 2% for quite some time in our forecast.
Switching focus to the UK then, does the Bank of England have a credibility problem at this point, given that dramatic revision in its growth forecasts for the UK? The biggest revision that we've seen since 1997 when, of course, it gained its independence.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very big revision, 2.25%, the level of GDP, the biggest ever. But of course, the forecast had also been out of date in terms of the assumptions that had gone into that. Central banks, of course, only do quarterly updates to their forecast, and gas prices. The rest of the world had turned out to be much more resilient.
Så that
forecast made a lot of sense. It had been out of date. They moved closer to our forecast. They moved closer to the consensus.
Oppsiden veldig vanskelig å si på Daxen, for den har faen meg all-time high, så du aner ikke hvor høyt den kan gå. Den har liksom ikke noe sånn supermotstand her oppe. Men når jeg er short, så sitter bra penger nå.
That you're still seeing strong underlying price pressures, and that the bank probably will do another couple of hikes. So we have them going to 5% in an effort to really cool the labor market and the inflation pressures sufficiently.
Okay, always really smart. Yari Stern, thank you for joining us in the studio this Monday morning with a view on 5% for the Bank of England.
Shorte mer.
3.75 into
Selv om man bryter opp.
2024 for the European Central Bank. Yari Stern, of course, Goldman Sachs chief European economist. Let's get the Bloomberg Business Flash now with Sarah Hall. Sarah.
Hi, Tom. Gold giant Newmont has agreed to buy Australian rival Newcrest Mining in a deal worth about $19 billion. The transaction sees Newmont consolidate its position as the world's biggest producer of bullion, with mines across the Americas, Africa, Asia and Australia. Global gold miners are facing the prospect of stagnating production and rising input costs. The UK and Switzerland are kicking off talks for a free trade agreement to boost ties between the two nations. Trade Secretary
Skal ikke være så grådig. Husk I dag skal jeg bygge portefølje og gjøre alt riktig.
With formal negotiations due to begin next week. The prize for the two sides is a reduction in trade barriers in areas like finance and legal and professional services. Vice Media has filed for bankruptcy protection, punctuating a rapid decline for the media upstart that once boasted a valuation of more than $5.5 billion. It follows a tumultuous few months for the company, with its flagship TV news show taken off the air and more than 100 staff laid off last month. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
Bygger sten for sten I dag.
This is Bloomberg. Tom.
Sarah Halls in Dubai, thank you very much. Coming up, we're going to get the stocks that are moving this morning, including Wood Group. That's as Apollo says it does not intend to make an offer for the engineering company. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Kan sette en ny short her. Det er motstand her på 1 minute chart. Ja. Der. Ja. Tar en liten short til på vei ned. Litt skummelt, men på løpefart nå så detter det. En tight stop. Der ja. Ta gevinst. Vent da. Ta gevinst nå. Ute. Sitter inne med den fortsatt. Det viser mot. Kan falle videre.
I don't think we can replicate Tesla. Tesla is a unique because when they founded and the personality behind it.
Vi må klart å shorte enda mer. Så lurer på, hvorfor shorter du? Hvorfor beholder du ikke posisjonen? Det er masse motstandere. Shorter mer når han bryter der. Sitter fortsatt med shorten der. Den er veldig fin. Ta gevinst på den shorten der oppe. Nå, ute på den shorten. Gjort det veldig bra. Nå er 0 posisjoner, vurderer så lange. Skal bare se om klare å holde seg her. Det klarer han ikke. Hvis vi skal gjøre alt etter boka nå, så gjør vi ingenting. Hvis vi ser en breakout, så gjør vi ingenting. Men jeg pleier å scalpe alle retninger, ikke sant? Så jeg er veldig...
Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day.
Sett en ny short. Der. Satt den på den streken her nå. Da dekker vi oss der nede. Veldig smart. Shorta på nytt der nå. Og så kommer det dit igjen. Så shorter jeg på nytt. Her nede. Så har du hatt en bevegelse som tar imot på støttenivåene. Klarer ikke. Bryter gjennom på toppen. Bang! Går videre ned. Ta gevinst på den der her oppe nå. Short på nytt der. Ta gevinst på den der oppe. Ute. Tok gevinst. Sitter fortsatt med shorten her nede for å se om klarer å bryte med.
Potentially be a big risk for Erdogan. Now markets don't like the uncertainty there. We're seeing a lot of those Turkey exposed stocks falling. We've also got a bank over in the Middle East getting hit and DFDS in Denmark.
Nå kommer den gjennom, antagelig. Kan shorte mer her nå, og da får jeg en liten... Får ikke det bevegelsen jeg vil ha da. Short litt mer nå. Vent litt.
Exactly, very good there, Tom. So Wood Group, as you say, getting absolutely slammed today, down 35%. We can see it on the screen there. By far the worst performing stock in Europe today. Apollo saying they won't make a bid for the company. Now they did previously bid 240 pence per share for Wood Group. Wood Group rejected that. We can see it's wiped all of that today, the worst performer we've got this morning.
Joe, what's happening with Currys?
So Currys going the
Og shortet her oppe også.
around 6% last time I looked. Now they are saying that the UK trading over the past 2 months has been better than expected. That stock gaining around 6%. It's a bit of a bellwether in the UK given it has 289 stores. So we're seeing a bit of strength in some other UK retailers as well. That one is positive.
All right, Bloomberg's Joe Easton with the stocks on the move this morning. Thank you. Coming up, going for gold, Newmont further cements its position as the world's biggest producer of bullion. That's after acquiring its rival Newcrest. We get the details next. This is Bloomberg.
Fixing things that go wrong and smoothing out bumps in the road is what customers expect from energy providers. And for Duke's renewable assets, that process is overseen from one room in an office building in Charlotte, North Carolina. Brian Savoy showed me around the company's Renewable Control Center.
This is where our operators are monitoring and managing over 5,000 megawatts of renewables across the United States.
How would this differ from like a conventional asset monitoring center?
Yeah, so assets, historically, they would have the monitoring center on site. So you might have an operator with screens, but at the site, whereas this we can do 90 sites. There's offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, and they're looking for the smallest change in output because every megawatt hour is money. When one of these assets isn't producing full capacity, we're putting another resource on, and we're having to toggle this on a consistent basis. And this, as clouds come, this is by the minute. This is not, or the hour it's off. No, it's by the minute, and it'll fall, come back, and we have assets that follow this digitally as well, so that we can keep a consistent flow of electrons on the grid.
This month, Bloomberg brings you the latest from China's 14th Annual National People's Congress, including China's COVID
Den klarte ikke bryte ned.
outlook and geopolitical tensions. Continuing coverage this week on Bloomberg.
Kunne ønske helt opp og close gapet før eventuelt den går videre ned da. Men nå ser den både Tyskland kommer ned, den er opp, puttene rører på seg. Hva er makro som kommer i dag? Det er positivt på seg. Det er masse positivt på nyheter. Kjøre nye short.
Welcome back to the Open. We're 30 minutes into the European trading day. Here are your top stories. Turkish stock slump triggering a circuit breaker as the nation's election looks set to head for a second round of voting. The lira weakens. President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy plan to meet tomorrow as debt ceiling negotiations appear to gather momentum. Global equities move higher. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky meets UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in London today. That's after receiving promises of military support from Italy, Germany and France over the weekend. So geopolitics front and centre for us today. We're expecting Fed speakers out later this week as well to give some mood, some commentary in terms of where the Fed goes next across those European or US stocks, by the way, still essentially flat for the 30 days, the recent 30 days. We'll see if the futures spell out further upside. As it seems, at least at the staff level, there's a bit of momentum in terms of these debt ceiling talks and whether or not that really picks up pace. Across the European equities then, the benchmark is gaining 0.3%. So a little bit of optimism coming through for European stocks. Again, been range bound for the last 30 days, 30 to 50 days, around 455, 465. If you can break out and get through to 470, that might be indicative of more optimism for European equities. But all the headwinds, of course, there is a need, arguably, for a bit of a catalyst. The DAX currently gaining 0.3%, the FTSE 100 up 22 points, getting 0.3%, despite the drag that's coming through on energy. Across the sectors then, there's energy at the bottom of the list, down 0.4%. of a percent. Oil under pressure for a fourth straight day on those recession concerns, on those slowing growth concerns, particularly out of China and the US. Chemicals also down 0.2% across the top, though. Consumer and products, travel and leisure also gaining 0.5%. Insurance higher as well.
Daglig vinst her nå. Nei, må litt lenger ned.
Into the trading session this Monday morning. Let's focus on deal making now, though. Newmont has agreed to buy Newcrest in a deal worth over $19 billion, consolidating the US miner's status as the world's biggest gold producer. Let's bring in our banking reporter, Harry Brunton then. Harry, shares closed Friday about 3%.
Da de her igjen. Shorten nettopp her tok gevinst. Er det ikke ukentlig dagsesmye faen hvor det tar? Er det ikke utenkelig? Jo. Det har skjedd hver dag. Dagsen er dritsterk.
Just a few weeks ago that the board was ready to recommend a deal, which was, news at the time. However, they did extend due diligence last week at the tail end of last week.
Jeg bryr meg ikke om Dagsen går opp eller ned, bare jeg kan være med.
It was really just to buy a bit more time. So, there's surprise to the upside. There's also a bit of a presence.
Jeg går long, hvis jeg skal gå opp. Men akkurat nå så nå zoomer jeg veldig da. Det er veldig, området er veldig lite.
Stuck with it so far as well.
Yeah, indeed. So, Harry, talk to us about the rationale then. The rationale for Newmont to add this scale.
Satt inn 2000 på en coin i går, gikk rett til 0 på 1000. Å, helvete. Det har du råd til. Du har faen tjent så mye penger. Det har du råd til.
And it's not getting explored, and on top of that there's geopolitical crises, people kind of getting more and more worried about exotic locations where they used to be more than happy to sign deals just a few years ago in places like Africa or South America. So as things get a bit more shaky globally, and then on top of that you're going to need to be finding more high quality jurisdictions that actually have output as well and are bringing it up to scale.
Kjører shorten på nytt, den jeg dekket meg på stad.
They have about 60 million ounces, so at least in reserves. So just purely on a reserves basis, let alone ongoing production, they're really up there. And on top of that, they've kind of got a real touch in terms of some new technologies that really help extraction from existing mine sites as well. Their Cadia and Lahir assets are big assets for them. And they've done really well in areas, some
gevinst på short, men var det week.
Areas called underground block caving, flotation extraction, some pretty novel.
Jeg må mer. Det blir for lite.
All right, really excellent context. Harry Brunton in Sydney on the back of this huge deal, a mega deal within the gold sector. Thank you. Let's check back in on Turkish stocks then. The reaction then across these equity markets in Turkey to the news that the vote is likely, at least voting is likely to go to a second round. So losses there of a little under 5% after trading was briefly suspended. Of course, the news that Erdogan has a slim majority at this point, but not enough to get above that 50% threshold to prevent a second round vote. At least that is the latest coming out of Turkey, and some traders saying that we are set for a very volatile 2 weeks. Some describing this as the worst of the potential outcomes, at least the views of some market participants. You can see equities currently down 5% over in Turkey. We'll keep across that story for you, of course, and get the latest in just the next couple of minutes and the implications for Turkey and within the region. Now, let's get the first word news with Sarah Hall. Sarah.
Hi, Tom. Pro-democracy parties have scored a resounding victory in Thailand's parliamentary
Gevinst på nytt nå.
99% of votes counted. The Move Forward Party is ahead in total seats and in the popular vote. The party advocates changing a law that restricts criticism of Thailand's powerful monarchy. The result is the biggest challenge to the royalist-backed establishment.
The
country seized power in a coup nearly a decade ago.
Tok gevinst. Sitter fortsatt med de shortene her. Jeg tar bare kjappe stunts, for det markedet er jo helt fucked.
Following a meeting between Zelensky and President Emmanuel Macron. Zelensky's weekend tour also took in visits to Italy and Germany. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has conceded a loss in the southern swing state of Karnataka. Rahul Gandhi's Congress party scored a rare victory, taking 60% of seats in the state Congress. its biggest win against Modi's BJP since 2014. The winning party's campaign included promises of direct cash benefits for women and free electricity. G7 finance chiefs have concluded their meeting in Japan by presenting a united front on more support for Ukraine. And while China didn't get a direct mention in the group's statement, there were thinly veiled plans to counter Beijing's dominance of global supply chains. The G7's unity comes in
Det ganske sjukt hvor høyt oppe vi på Dagsnytt, altså. Nå gjør jeg penger igjen, så det greit. Hei faen.
Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Sarah Halls, and this is Bloomberg. Tom.
Sarah Halls in Dubai, thank you. Coming up, Turkey heads for a second round of voting. We're going to get the latest election news next. Some analysis. We are live in Istanbul. This is Bloomberg.
Nå har jeg penger på begge shortene der. Kan ikke ta gevinst, ikke være så jævla grådig. Tok gevinst, der. Sitter jeg nå med den shorten, den shorten, den shorten. Der shorter jeg dritten fra der oppe. Her shorter jeg fra. Tatt gevinst der, tatt gevinst der, tok gevinst der. Sitter her fortsatt. Hvorfor ikke jeg bare holder posisjonene mine fordi jeg må bygge opp hele kontoen på nytt, så jeg kan ikke ta for mye risiko. Og jeg best på korte transaksjoner, så det går fint. Hallo. Hallo. Har du tatt ned som seriøst, liksom? Hva mener du da? Det skal gå automatisk. Ok. Greit det her.
Business Week Radio, live weekday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern.
We got a little bit of talking.
Come on, are you guys ready? Harnessing the power of Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec bring you the latest news from the worlds of business, technology, politics, and more.
How does the Fed play into this and what the Fed does potentially?
This is so exhausting and this is so all-encompassing.
Listen on Bloomberg Radio and streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals.
DOJ or other authorities.
Could face bigger challenges next.
Was going to keep rate welcome. This is a three.
As the economic picture down.
Is it be okay? Is getting ready to make
Slutt hva nå?
Skal dette røyk?
Ja.
Drar vi?
Ja.
Er det greit?
Jepp.
Welcome back to the Open. 40 minutes into the European trading day. Some upside coming across European equities of 0.2%. Futures in the US also high by 0.3. The dollar is down, and treasuries, US treasuries, are largely unmoved so far in the session. Let's get to what's happening then on the ground in Turkey. The presidential race there will likely go to a second round of voting in 2 weeks. That's as President Erdogan falls short of the 50% needed for a decisive first.
Er det penger fra der? Er det penger fra der?
Yusuf Gamaladin in Istanbul. Yusuf, what is the latest
Nei,
update
det går
in
ikke.
terms of the
Det
market
er noe gærent med
reaction
Instagram.
to this news?
Well, Tom, let me get you up to speed because initially out of the gates on the equity
Den
market,
går ikke å aktivere i vinken. Det er noe galt med Instagram, så det.
we're back online now and clawing back some of those losses,
Oh,
still
shit,
around 5% intraday. Look out for some of the banks who are getting hit hard in the run-up to
Men
round
det har ikke noe å si, for det står bare kom bare ikke noe link.
rally in Turkish stocks around 10% of the last 5 trading sessions. So clearly the market was
Greit, da.
completely mispositioned around around the potential outcomes, and that is getting corrected. It's also getting corrected in
Så
corporate
derfor jeg må
bonds.
slå den jævla telefonen min, jeg får ikke fokusert, for
In the
faen.
dollar lira trade, always a bit of a difficult gauge because of the lack of liquidity and the constant intervention. The local
Kan ikke holde på med dette her, din kuk, når jeg trader.
holding
Helvete, eller?
relatively range bound, but further losses are anticipated if current economic policies are going to be the way of this government, assuming, of course, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is able to cement his position. Also look up for those credit default swaps, marginal repricing there as well, Tom.
Okay, excellent. Yusuf Gamaluddin in Istanbul for us in terms of the market reaction to the political events.
Nå gir du deg. Skal jeg tape penger, eller?
With Evren Bolta, Professor of International
Ja, hallo.
Relations at Osijek University. Professor, thank you for joining us this morning. Is the momentum now with President Erdogan?
Sure, it is. I mean, President Erdogan got 49%, almost 49% of the votes, and the People's Coalition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu got the 45% of the votes. So if there is going to be a second round, President Erdogan definitely needs less votes to support him to win the majority in the elections. So the momentum is with him, I guess.
And there's a third-party candidate who has been compelled to drop out with the votes not coming in high enough. Where do the votes of the third-party candidate come through? Do they end up then backing Erdogan or
Ute av den posisjonen.
Sinan Ogan, the third-party candidate, got the 5% of votes, and we are basically
Sitter fortsatt short der og der.
Who is going to be backing up in the second round? But Sinan Ogan is more on the nationalist front and secular and nationalist, and the likelihood of maybe half and half or maybe most of the votes going for President Erdogan, supporting President Erdogan, it's not clear right now, but it seems that the fact that President Erdogan needs less votes to get the majority gives him a clear advantage in the second round, I guess.
Market participants are telling us that they're expecting a very volatile 2 weeks ahead of that second round vote. How fraught do you expect the next 2 weeks to be?
In terms of politics of Turkey, I don't think the next 2 weeks is going to be as competitive as we have been experiencing, witnessing in the last 2 weeks. So I'm not expecting any sort of political turmoil. Definitely, Nation Alliance is going to be, still will be in the race and will be pushing for the majority still. They're not going to drop out. They're not going to drop out their ambition to win this election. But I don't think there's going to be a political turmoil in Turkey in the next 2 weeks.
Do we have a clear sense of what President Erdogan's economic priorities would be should he win this second vote and be reconfirmed as president of Turkey?
Well, economy is on the top of Turkey's agenda, and it's on the top of Turkey's elected's agenda as well. And in fact, the foreign policy of President Erdogan has been basically shaped by this economic rationale. And he's going to be some sort of revisitation of the unorthodox economic policies that he has been following. We have seen some signs of that, but it seems that there's not going to be a radical change in the way that Turkey has been conducting its economic policy. But there may be some changes in the way that how Turkey has been conducting its foreign policy. And foreign policy is going to basically be responding to the economic rationale more and more in the next 5 years if President Erdogan wins.
Would a win for Erdogan be a win for Vladimir Putin, or is it more nuanced than that?
I think it's more nuanced than that. As I said, the top priority of foreign policy will be economy, and Turkey cannot forego Russian energy in the short term. And there is this really asymmetrical dependency between Turkey and Russia in terms of energy, and that President Erdogan has to follow in this term as well if he wins again. 44% of Turkey's domestic consumption comes from Russian energy, Russian resources. So that's going to continue. But we do know that President Putin's favorite candidate in this election was President Erdogan. They had a working relationship for many years right now. Turkey, under President Erdogan, had a working relationship with Russia in Syria, in many regional conflicts. And in fact, Turkish trade with Russia has been on the rise in the last year as well. So we see this trend.
Det penger på begge shortene mine, som dere ser?
Definitely needs to be a nuance because Turkey's trade partner is still the West, is still the European Union. And given that economy is going to be in a very dire condition in the next years to come.
Shorte mer her nå. Hvorfor jeg gjør det, fordi jeg synes at hele momentumet har snudd. Shorte mer her nå. Det egentlig litt risky, for jeg shorter på day low. Det veldig, veldig klar over. Og den har en støtte her nede. Men jeg skjønner ikke hvorfor Doxen så sterk. For det ikke noe av makro som tilsier at dette her skal opp. Det eneste som gjør at vi skal opp i dag, energiprisene. That's it. Jeg kan ta ut noe gevinst her nå. Tok jeg den gevinsten der. Og så kan jeg velge å... Jeg sitter fortsatt i den, og jeg sitter fortsatt i den. Nå sitter jeg bare i 2 posisjoner. Så kan man si, dumt å ta shorte på day low. Fuck off! Det ikke dumt i det hele tatt. Det en plan og mening med alt jeg gjør. Så greia her det at hvis den bryter her nå, så får jeg, for å si det på et annet språk da, bryter den her nå, så får jeg 10-gangeren. Går den opp, så taper jeg kanskje, ok, kan gå opp til hit da. Kan gå opp til hit hvis jeg bommer fullstendig. Treffer jeg nå, så treffer jeg jo helt ned hit, liksom. Så risk-rewarden veldig bra da. Skal vi dra nå? Ja, jeg må dra. Sånn. Jeg tilbake om en halvtime. Jeg sitter fortsatt i shorten, det jo sånn jeg taper penger når jeg blir borte. Men vi satser på at det går bra. Snakkes etterpå, kommer tilbake snart.
Okay, interesting. And Professor, before we let you go, your expertise obviously in terms of the politics of Turkey and international relations. I just want to take it back and see how we can link that into the market reaction. Investors are clearly not happy so far with the result and the prospect of a second round vote. Do the unorthodox policies, particularly around the central bank of Turkey, do you expect those to continue under a rejuvenated Erdogan, if indeed that is the result that we get?
I think, I mean, I'm not an economy expert, but I think the unorthodox economic policies of some sort, maybe not as radical as we have been witnessing in the last year, is going to continue. I'm not expecting a radical change, in fact.
Okay. Evelyn Balta, Professor of International Relations at Özyeğin University. Really appreciate your analysis, your insights this morning, of course, on the back of a consequential vote in Turkey. And as you look ahead to the potential in 2 weeks' time of a second round vote. Coming up, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stops by London today as he continues his European tour. We bring you the latest on that next. This is Bloomberg.
on the course may not be etched into any record books, but following him around, it's clear that it's not for lack of trying.
Jeez.
We were constantly hustling behind him as he caught up with executives in the portfolio companies and reminisced with former and current players.
He was a day trader. He taught himself, self-made day trader. And so he's on the bus after a game in New England, and he's day trading on the bus, and Bill Belichick sees him and cuts him on the spot. You know, in many ways, it's a convention, right, of the people that I don't see maybe once a year. And so it's kind of all come together. My firm, our charity, fundraising efforts, and then the friends that are around. My dad and my brother, it all happens right there as a confluence of all these parts of my life that have found its common center.
Back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Good morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets, trying to open.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
And welcome to Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to the Open, 53 minutes into the European trading day. Gains of 0.2% across European equities. Futures in the US also pointing higher across your sectors. Bottom of the list is chemicals and energy, down around 0.2%. Consumer products are topping the list in terms of your sectors, gaining 0.8%. Basic resources also up 0.5. Let's take a look at what we're focusing on this week. On Monday, we get Eurozone industrial production figures. So, in a little over an hour time at 10 a.m. UK time. Then later in the day, the BOE's Hugh Pill speaks about the cost of living crisis in the UK. Anything he says about wages, of course, and inflation will be important. Then on Tuesday, we get UK jobs data and US retail sales a few hours later. Is the strength of the consumer in the US still holding up? On Wednesday, we get the latest Eurozone inflation figures. Also, BOE Governor Andrew Bailey speaks at the British Chambers of Commerce event. And Thursday, the Mexican Central Bank announces its rate decision. On Friday, the G7 summit kicks off in Hiroshima. If the US president makes it, that may signal movement and further momentum in terms of these debt talks. Let's get back to what is happening in terms of the war in Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky saying he's going to meet with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in London. That is going to happen today. The Ukrainian president has been on a European tour over the weekend with stops in Italy, Germany and France. For more, we go to our Europe correspondent Maria Tadao in Brussels. Maria, a big diplomatic push then from Zelensky. What does he aim to get out of it? How much has he achieved in these last few days?
Yes, Tom, and it's not over because he is going to London next. If you look at the European tour this weekend, you look at the stops in Italy, Germany, and France, to me, there's two real takeaways from this. One, of course, is that big package that was announced on Saturday by the German government. Remember, 2.7 billion euros in new weapons for Ukraine, and a very telling interview on Saturday on Italian TV from the Ukrainian president, who repeated his line, he does not see the point of talking with Vladimir Putin. It is about the counteroffensive. Now, when you look ahead to the meeting today in the UK with the UK Prime Minister, it is no secret that the government of the UK has a lot of aggressive language when it comes to Russia, a lot of bravado. The Ukrainians love it, but obviously they love the weapons even more. And a lot of that conversation will feature on potential new weapons that could go Ukraine's way. Remember, they have talked about the fighter jets for months now. The other point, which I presume has come up across Europe and will come up again in the UK, is the idea of NATO. Remember, Tom, there is a very important, I would dare say, NATO meeting that will happen in Vilnius in Lithuania in July. The Ukrainians have asked repeatedly that they want to see not just a vague promise that one day the country will join NATO, but actually a roadmap to membership for NATO. This is a controversial topic, as you know, Tom, because some fear that a country at war against Russia to be given that kind of promise and a timeline could escalate things further. But that is a political aspiration of Ukraine, but also of some of the Eastern European countries like the Baltics, like Poland, who say it is about time this country gets some clarity about its future, not just in the EU, but also NATO.
Okay, Maria, today on the ground, we have the China lines as well, the China elements. We'll get Maria's thoughts on that, I hope, later this week. We're running short of time, though, and whether or not the China peace plan has been sidelined by this diplomatic activity from the Ukrainian president. Our European correspondent, of course, Maria today on the ground in Brussels around Zelensky's visit now in the UK, expected to meet you with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the next few hours. That is it for the European Market Open. Surveillance Early Edition is up next. European stocks are gaining 0.2%. Futures in the US also pointing high by around 0.4% on the S&P, even is 0.3% on the Nasdaq future. The dollar is slightly softer. We continue to focus on Turkish assets. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
What do you like most about your job?
I think the people. I mean, ultimately, we're a people business. A lot of what my job is as CEO of the company is to give those people sort of motivation, to tell them where we're going, to encourage them to come up and do their best work, to encourage them to collaborate. Sometimes you sort of think you're almost a psychologist, as you are a business leader, I think, sometimes.
And so what's your best piece of advice?
I love pitches. I love being sort of leading from the front, if you like, and spending times with teams. I love to see the work that we're doing when we pitch for a piece of new business, often when we come together. So I guess I try and put myself in the seat of the client. And what's the client going to think when they see this work? Are they going to be excited? Is it going to turn their brand around? How's it going to resonate with their consumers? So as much as possible, I try and play that role.
Our studios in New York and San Francisco, our expert hosts of the data and analysis about the companies you know and the startups to watch, plus the interviews you don't want to miss. Watch Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow on Bloomberg Technology, the only daily business show dedicated to tech, right in the middle of the trading action. 12 p.m. on the East Coast, 9 a.m. in the West, only on Bloomberg Television, your global business authority. Surveillance Early Edition with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning. Welcome to Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Danny Berger in London, in for Francine. Here's what's coming up on today's program. Turkish stocks resume trading after a circuit breaker as the nation's election looks to be heading for a second round of voting. The lira weakens along with European stocks that have exposure to the country. President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy plan to meet tomorrow as debt ceiling negotiations appear to gather momentum. Global equities move higher. Plus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meets UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in London today after receiving promises of support from Italy, Germany, and France when it comes to the military over the weekend. A quick check on the markets this morning. We are getting some breaking lines when it comes to the EU Commission. Is that going to move the euro here? They have raised their Eurozone inflation and GDP forecast for this and next year. The inflation forecast for 2023 is now at 5.8%. It was at 5.6%. For 2024, it goes to 2.8 from 2.5%. And the forecast for GDP for this year is at 1.1%. 1.6% for 2024, saying that downside risks to to the economic outlook have indeed risen. Well, the euro is stronger this morning. Overall, we are seeing some dollar weakness. There has been that Pavlovian urge to buy the dollar over those debt ceiling fears, over just general economic fears. Some of that waning out this morning. Does the dollar downside continue once again? The dollar is, of course, much stronger versus the lira so far this morning. Now, we are looking at a 10-year yield that moves higher, up 2 basis points. That flattening in the curve has been happening since Friday when we got the UMich survey. Again, inflation concerns, that being entrenched, is really rife throughout these global markets. That's what UMich showed us. Perhaps that's what these European Commission figures are showing us too. Gold has been the winner when it comes to the debt ceiling debates. That's according to our latest MLive poll survey. Gold ranked highest is where you want to hide out. Now, overall European indices, those are moving higher this morning, up 0.2%. When it comes to the regional breakdown, you are seeing some outperformance in France. Consumer goods, those outperforming this morning. FTSE 100, that's up about 0.3%. So most of these regional benchmarks heading higher. Now, Turkey is likely heading for 2 weeks of political uncertainty after both President Erdogan and his main opposition rival failed to win a majority in the country's election. The latest results show Erdogan leading the vote, but short of the 50% needed to avoid a second round. Let's go out to Bloomberg's Yusuf Kamaluddin, who's in Istanbul. Yusuf, you spent the morning talking to experts about this election. What's been the reaction so far to the results?
I mean, a little bit of a sense of surprise, Danny, because remember the pollsters going into this had expected Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu to really do a lot better than he eventually did in round one. Based on preliminary results, he trailed the incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and it raises further questions about where it leaves the challenger for the second round, because the reality is that a lot of the followers of Sinan Oğan, who got 5.3% in round one, those people, for the most part, are likely to vote for Recep Tayyip Erdogan if it came down to it, if they had to make a decision. And so President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, perhaps ironically, in round two is in a better position than he was in round one. Adding to that even further are some of the initial parliamentary results that give another tailwind to the incumbent. But ultimately, it raises bigger questions about the longer-term trajectory of economic policy. We're seeing the markets fierce repricing on quite a few fronts, Danny.
Yeah, get more into that, Yusuf. What have we seen in terms of market reaction?
Well, on the equity side of things, we hit the circuit breaker initially. The banks selling off hard. Now we're giving back some of the initial losses, but what I would look out for are some of the bond losses as well. Corporate bonds are selling off. At the same time, you're seeing the overnight funding rate for liras surge by about 400%. And then the other thing that's come to light are the credit default swaps. Remember, dollar and lira isn't always the best proxy to understand investor positioning. You know, there is quite a bit of intervention from the central bank. The CDS is on a 5-year basis, telling you a story of 600 basis points, the highest level since March 21. And this is a warning signal from the market, which had been positioning for what is widely considered a market-friendly outcome. The initial results we have clearly are not that, and this is what the market's telling you, Danny.
Yusuf, thank you so much for your coverage throughout today. Bloomberg's Yusuf Kamaluddin in Istanbul. Now to another election in Thailand where pro-democracy parties have dominated the parliamentary election. The results set up the biggest challenge to the royalist-backed establishment since the military seized power in a coup nearly a decade ago. Let's go to Bloomberg's Asia Markets editor Margot Towie in Bangkok. Margot, just how significant is this result for Thailand?
It's very significant. It's surprising in the number of votes that went to the opposition parties, two in particular. Both were expected to do well, but not as well as they did. So that's the big surprise, and it really is a step back for the military-backed parties that have ruled Thailand for almost a decade now. Where they go from here, where the military goes from here, remains to be seen. But the two opposition parties are talking already about forming a government. They're also in talks with some other smaller opposition parties with the hope of forming a coalition, which they need. Neither of them can serve a government in their own right. One of the hurdles that they face, however, is a Senate that was appointed by the military junta, and that will have a say in who is appointed Prime Minister. They will have an equal vote to the members of the lower house of government. So that remains to be seen. We're not out of it yet. There'll be some weeks of negotiating and horse trading, no doubt, before we see the formation of a new government.
So what does it mean for investors in the meantime as we wait for the new government and potential next steps after that government forms?
Typically in Thailand, you don't see a lot of reaction from investors to political changes, and the reason is that the policies typically don't change that much. In this election, there's been a lot of promises of pump priming, of consumers particularly, so people can pick up spending. So you have seen, and you will see, I imagine, a pickup in some of the consumer-related shares. Banks may do well, loans and so forth. All in all, it looks fairly good for investors. This morning we also had a good set of GDP numbers out for the last quarter, which bodes well for the year ahead. That said, the hiatus between the election and forming the government means there will be some delay in policy making and spending. So, really overall, I don't really think it will impact investors that much, and that's what we're seeing from analysts. That's their view.
Okay, well, it certainly has been an interesting day for EMFX. Margot, thank you so much. That's Bloomberg's Margot Towie in Bangkok. Coming up, President Biden and U.S. congressional leaders will resume debt ceiling negotiations on Tuesday. We'll discuss more of that next. This is Bloomberg.
Would you say race relations in the United States are much better than when you were growing up in Mississippi, or do you think we've made less progress than you think we should have made?
Both. I think that much better than when I was growing up. There's so many people who occupy areas and I never thought I would see them in. But I would have hoped it would be better. It's been a lot of progress. And somehow we're in an era now where, in spite of the progress, race relations in certain areas has become very scary. Some of the things that one reads about now remind me of growing up in Mississippi.
Japan's critical role in the global economy is changing as the world recalibrates. After decades of stagnation, Japan's leaders are forging a more innovative and sustainable path forward to revitalize the nation. Corporate giants, policymakers, and pioneers tell us how they're doing just that. Every week on Japan Ahead, right here on Bloomberg Television.
Has the Fed coverage you're looking for. Today, Bloomberg's Mike McKee sits down with Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic.
There are just a lot of things to reflect on in terms of where the economy is.
Then on Tuesday, an exclusive interview with Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin.
Everybody's got a recession playbook.
And an interview with Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee.
We should gather further data.
It all starts today, right here on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Now now is probably not the absolute best time to jump in.
It comes right down to the wire.
As we get to the 11th hour, the volatility spikes and equity markets can correct.
Markets get volatile, maybe the stock market go down.
You don't want to position and, add to equities right ahead of that.
The only way we can play this is to stand back, be careful.
Buy a 1 month, 2 month treasury bill.
There was a huge flight to safety.
A lot of defensive sectors look high priced.
Safety trade has become big tech again.
Investors continue to seek shelter there.
And I'm not sure it's as safe as it looks.
I wouldn't want to try and get too cute around timing my portfolio based on the whims of a handful of politicians in Washington.
Some of our guests there discussing the MLive polls question about where to invest as U.S. debt ceiling talks progress. Speaking of which, President Biden and U.S. congressional leaders are planning to meet Tuesday to resume those debt ceiling negotiations. National Economic Council Director Leo Brainard told CBS that talks are serious and constructive, but reiterated just how serious a default will be. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg senior economics reporter Michelle Damrisco. Michelle, we're still trying to figure out where this game of chicken stands at the moment. Where are we when it comes to this negotiation process?
Yeah, it really is a game of chicken, right, Danny? I mean, it's hard to tell when you've got the political back and forth that's just such a thick layer over everything, and a sort of blame game that continues on that side while everyone tries to say, oh, we won't default, but, nobody really has that certainty right now. So where we stand is we're all kind of clinging to that hope that the Tuesday meeting between President Biden and Speaker McCarthy actually yield some signs of progress. Now, remember last week when this meeting was delayed, our reporting showed that it was delayed for good reasons, that the staff level talks, especially around energy proposals, around fossil fuel production and some green energy items, those were progressing enough to make a delay happen for the leader level. So now we hope to see more signs of progress tomorrow. In the meantime, we're hearing more from either side that both sides see the other as recalcitrant and not able to kind of close this deal as we approach that June 1 X date.
Well, maybe some of that progress solidifies or justifies some of the lack of reaction from equity markets. Of course, there's been some reaction in T-bills and bond markets, but what is at stake for investors and the U.S. public here?
Yeah, it seems like, a lot of investors probably don't want to put their money where their mouth is just yet, but they are growing in nerves. And I think one thing to point out, especially off of that MLive Pulse survey, is that many investors think that this is worse than previous episodes. Of course, we've been down this road before, unfortunately, but they're seeing it as a more uncertain landscape than we've seen, for instance, in 2011 when we had a similar, challenge going on. So that is at stake. And of course, in the limelight is what happens to U.S. Treasuries. Of course, the Treasury Secretary tried to reassure in some terms with Anne-Marie Hordern in her interview last week that, the U.S. Treasury would not default. But, at the same time, she also could not guarantee that. So there is a huge, and she did warn Yellen, talking about economic and financial catastrophe if they don't pull this through. So of course, stakes are very, very high, a lot of uncertainty, and folks on the ground, outside of the investment world, I think a lot of everyday Americans are worried about what happens in the event of default to Social Security payments, to federal government salaries, to daily operations of critical agencies like the Federal Aviation Administration, Customs and Border Patrol. So we could really have a real mess on our hands as we approach that X date.
Once we get through that X date, and hopefully we do, I wonder if we'll kind of turn our attention back to inflation. If this is sort of dominating some of the headlines, but in reality, perhaps what's most worrying for bond markets is a UMich survey where inflation expectations are at a 12-year high.
Yeah, it really is, tough to make that call right now. Of course, we've got still some weeks of data before the Fed meets again. We had been seeing signs of disinflation. Of course, a lot of people pointing to Powell's favorite measure on services ex housing looking pretty good in terms of coming down, or at least moving in a good direction, easing off of highs. So, there are those signs, but yeah, consumer expectations are a whole different ball game, and if people don't feel it, then we could be in a real pickle when consumers are feeling like the prices will just increase, and then that kind of tends to have its own effect on eventual price growth. So a lot more to come on that front. I'm sure we'll be debating that in the weeks to come before the Fed decision.
A debate it feels like we're constantly having. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us always.
Every day.
Michelle Damrisco, every day in Singapore. Thanks for debating it with us. All right, let's get to your Bloomberg First Row News. With that, is Leanne Gerrans. Good morning, Leanne.
Hi, Danny. The UK and Switzerland are kicking off negotiations for a new trade agreement to boost ties between the two nations. Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch is set to meet her Swiss counterpart in Bern today, with formal negotiations due to begin next week. The prize for the two sides is a reduction in trade barriers in areas like finance and legal and professional services. Now, G7 finance chiefs have concluded their meeting in Japan by presenting a united front on more support for Ukraine. And while China didn't get a direct mention in the group statement, there were thinly veiled plans to counter Beijing's dominance of global supply chains. The G7's unity comes in stark contrast with the discord seen at the G20 in India less than 3 months earlier, which ended without the usual communique. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has conceded a loss in the southern swing state of Karnataka. Rahul Gandhi's Congress party scored a rare victory, taking 60% of seats in the state Congress, its biggest win against Modi's BJP since 2014. The winning party's campaign included promises of direct cash benefits for women and also free electricity. Gold giant Newmont has agreed to buy Australian rival Newcrest Mining in a deal worth $19 billion. The transaction sees Newmont consolidate its position as the world's biggest producer of bullion, with mines across the Americas, Africa, Asia, and also Australia. It comes as global gold miners are facing the prospect of stagnating production and rising import costs. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans, and this is Bloomberg. Danny.
Leanne, thank you so much. All right, coming up on the program, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is expected in London today as part of his European tour. What is he hoping to get from his trip? We're going to discuss that next. This is Bloomberg.
Kör på!
Men det låg inte tillbaka när vi prövade oss.
Hallo! Ja. Det har ikke skjedd så jævla mye, egentlig. $7.20 der, $40 der.
I don't think we can replicate Tesla. Tesla is a unique because when they found it and then personality behind it, the product is beautiful, technologically very, very strong. So in many areas, Tesla is Tesla, but Xpeng is Xpeng. We want to focus on what we think is important for our customers. Our customer like beautifully designed vehicles, either it's large SUV or sports sedan. We believe we have a very, very appealing family look that our customers is really attracted to. They like to have user-friendly features inside the cabin that has a technology feel. It's very smart. It enables them to really utilize the vehicle that's different.
Jeg ser at det var ganske mye penger I sted når jeg dro.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
Do you foresee a future where JP Morgan could potentially re-enter the Russian market?
One day, maybe, but it's very possible that won't happen in our lifetime.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance, the early edition. I'm Danny Berger in London. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has just arrived in the UK. That's after he stopped in Italy, Germany, and France over the weekend as part of his EU tour. Now, in Berlin, the German government announced its biggest military package for Ukraine.
Gevinst på shortmen over til øyeblikk.
Successful counteroffensive against Russia. Our European correspondent Maria Tadeo is with us now. Maria, so we have a big diplomatic push from Zelensky, one we probably haven't seen in months. What is he getting out of this?
Yes, Danny, and it's not over because, as you say, he is in London today. That completes, or should complete, unless there's a surprise in the works from the Ukrainians. The story has been, as you say, in Italy, France, Germany, and the UK.
Hvorfor jeg ikke tar gevinsten akkurat nå, er fordi det er litt smågrådig, og så tror jeg at du får en skifter nå.
Highlight, which is that package that was announced by the German government, the biggest to date, 2.7 billion euros worth of new weapons, obviously tactically important for Ukraine, but also symbolically relevant too, because there had been questions about whether or not there was fatigue when it comes to the allies and this counteroffensive. I think when you look at the situation in the UK, will probably very similar today. There will be a conversation about the weapons. Remember, the UK has had a lot of bravado in terms of this idea that Russia will lose and Ukraine
PGS er sterkt, da hentet seg med 2% i dag tidlig.
Weapons and potentially fighter jets. Remember, this has been in the work for months now when it comes to the UK. The other issue that I presume will come up to is NATO. Remember, Danny, there is an important NATO meeting that will happen in July, the Vilnius summit in Lithuania, and Ukraine has manifestly said it wants to get a clear roadmap to NATO membership for the next, the future. Will they get the dates that they want this roadmap? That is still a question that is up for play.
Hva er det som kommer klokka 11? Bra at du følger med. Empire State Manufacturing kommer klokken 2:30.
Yes, and it was a straightaway condemnation from the G7.
Economic forecast, industrial production. Ja, det er ikke sånn superviktig. Vi vet jo sånn cirka hvordan det går.
Mentions or features the word war, and China is clearly on the sidelines. Now, when it comes to the Chinese, this is interesting because we have seen this flurry of diplomacy. Remember, China had very successfully, to some extent, inserted itself in the mediation conversation. The world was waiting on this phone call between Xi Jinping and Zelensky, but a lot of that momentum, to some extent, has dissipated. A lot of this pegged to the scandal. Remember, the Chinese ambassador referring to the former Soviet nations that had questionable sovereignty. A lot of that dented the credibility of China and brought again this question of, is it really a neutral country? It is worth noting, however, the Chinese are sending a diplomat to Ukraine and Russia this week. But again, when you look at the language from the G7, the Germans, but also Zelensky himself, they repeat the basis of peace should be Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, not the Chinese. And by the way, the Ukrainian president made another interview on Italian TV on Saturday and repeated the way he looks at things. There is no point in talking to Vladimir Putin. The country is betting everything on a successful counteroffensive.
Okay, Maria, thank you very much. That's Maria Tadeo on the latest diplomatic push from Zelensky. Now, in other politics, a quick check on Turkey assets. It does look like we're heading towards a runoff with Erdogan, his main opposition. We are looking at Turkish stocks falling nearly 3%. They did hit the circuit breaker earlier, about an hour ago. They resumed trading. The CDS, the 5 years there, jumping to the highest since March 21. Of course, that's a pretty illiquid market. Dollar turning into gains in stocks with some exposure to Turkey, like BBVA, the Spanish bank, also seeing declines of 3.6%. All right, coming up on the program, from bodybuilder to the UK's youngest billionaire, we're going to start to talk with the Gymshark founder. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
Der satt den. Der satt shorten min.
The deal was the brainchild of Apollo CEO Mark Rowan. In January, Apollo closed its $11 billion all-stock merger with Athene Holding. It had already owned 35% of the insurer. Here's what Apollo gets out of the deal. Assets under management. Apollo expects them to double to about $1 trillion by 2026. Much of that projected growth will come from the merger.
Jeg kan ta gevinsten nå, men jeg lar den gå med.
Insurance companies typically go after much more modest returns than buyout investors. That will give Apollo more options for investing the cash. Athene is a steady provider of fee income. It has grown into one of the nation's biggest holders of fixed annuities, those retirement savings products favored by risk-averse customers. The merger will also allow Apollo to simplify its governance. It gave up its dual-class share structure and adopted a one-share, one-vote plan. The hope is that will eventually lead to Apollo's inclusion in the S&P 500.
Markets countdown in Europe. From the financial centers of the world, Bloomberg Markets European Close with Guy Johnson in London and Alex Steele in New York. Real-time numbers, real-time analysis. Weekdays. Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Turkish stocks resume trading after a circuit breaker as the nation's election looks to be headed for a second round of voting. The lira weakens along with European stocks that have exposure to the country. President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy plan to meet tomorrow as debt ceiling negotiations appear to gather momentum. Global equities move higher. Plus, Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky meets UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak after receiving promises of military support from Italy, Germany, and France over the weekend. Good morning. Welcome to Bloomberg Surveillance. This is the early edition. I'm Danny Berger in London. Now, our next guest is one of the UK's youngest billionaire and a founder of a sportswear empire from very humble beginnings. I also want to bring in our very own Leanne Garrance to join me in this conversation. Leanne, fitting that we would be talking about athleisure, considering anyone can find us after these shows quickly changing into our gym clothes.
I feel like that's all we've lived in for years. And I feel like Danny Berger and I, we definitely enjoy the gym and we enjoy our gym clothes, don't we too?
It is very true. And someone who perhaps is benefiting from that is Ben Francis. He is the CEO and founder of Gymshark.
Yes, indeed. And he does join us this morning, Danny Berger. So that's why we've opened the conversation with our love for leisure wear. Ben Francis, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, you opened a bricks and mortar store here in London in Regent Street 7 months ago. Ben, how's it all going?
It's going incredibly well, thank you. It was a big step for us because everything we've ever done for the last 10 years of our history was always online. And we've always been keen to do something offline and move into a more omni-channel sort of approach. And we actually signed the lease for that store during the height of COVID, so it was a big leap for us. But I'm really pleased to say that it's been a great success.
So an absolute massive leap for you, and you said during COVID. Are you thinking the UK is a good place to invest, and are we going to see any more of these stores coming up on our high streets across the
Markedet tørker jo helt inn. Det er faen ikke noe volum her i det hele tatt.
Yes, I'm an absolutely massive fan of the UK and investing in the UK. I think we're super fortunate in many ways, and that's not to say that it hasn't been a really tough couple of years for lots of people with, you know, increased cost of living crisis and prices and inflation and things like that. But what we have to remember is the UK is a really small country with a really high population. We can export out to the US and the EU really easily. And we're really optimistic about things moving forward.
So is that a yes to more brick and mortar stores, Ben?
Oh, and then in terms of more brick and mortar stores, I think because of the success of our London store, I think we'd be stupid to not look into it, and that's something that we're just starting to look into now.
All right, looking forward to that. I gotta wonder though, Ben, how strong is the consumer right now? Are folks still willing to pay £50 for a pair of leggings?
I mean, yeah, we're absolutely seeing that. And I think you'll be well aware there are lots of other companies that sell products significantly higher price point than us. We're still at a very, very accessible price point. We're really, really confident in our product. We think the quality really does speak for itself. And again, because of just the rapidly changing world at the moment, there are different weeks and different months where things spike and peak and trough and change. But at the moment, we're really confident, and we are seeing the numbers come through particularly strongly over the last few months.
Ben, I hear you saying that you're confident the numbers are coming through strongly, you've got a good price point going on, but we are seeing inflation eating into profits throughout industries. Where are you feeling the pressure? Where are you feeling the pinch right now?
Yeah, so we've definitely felt it, as all other companies similar to ourselves, with raw materials, labour costs, freight. Like I will say, the last few months, things have definitely got better. And we're starting to see those costs sort of ease slightly. So we're hoping that that continues. But like I said, the demand is there, revenues are still growing. And we do think a lot of that is because of the fact that we've continued to invest in our brand through the Regent Street store, through different marketing efforts and things like that.
Are you going to, though, cut down on some of your costs? There are reports that you let some of your staff go in the U.S. Is that part of this mission, again, to keep costs low and at the same time make sure profitability is still in check?
Yeah, clearly we want to protect profitability, but we have taken a hit to our profitability, and that's because we really wanted to continue to invest into our brand. We want to build a 100-year brand, and we don't believe that you build a 100-year brand by only investing in that brand during the periods of economic growth and prosperity. We need to consistently invest over a prolonged period of time. And in terms of the restructuring of the business, I've learned through my, I guess, short 10-year career working at Gymshark from start up to where we are today, that businesses need different structures at different stages of growth. That, the requirements of businesses change depending on the macro environment as well. And we wanted to just restructure our business into a way that not only protects the structure of the business, but allows us to be really agile. When we look forward to what will win in the future, we think that continued agility is going to allow us to, really maximize the growth of our brand.
So continued agility, speaking about there, Ben. What about an IPO here in London? Any consideration of that happening?
To be honest, we're not thinking about IPO at the moment. Right now, it's all about really controlling costs, building out the best product and focusing on the core of our business. And like I said, building the most robust, strong, but also agile business that we can. Maybe that's something that we'll consider further down the line.
But I got to say, your growth was astronomical, and it really was about capturing onto the online trend. I mean, you were one of the first, perhaps, to be marketing on TikTok versus any other of these gym brands. For you right now, what is your medium of choice? What's the most successful medium for you to be advertising on right now? Is it still TikTok? Has something else come up that interests you more?
No, listen, TikTok's really, really important to us. And like you say, we've gone from, TikTok not existing to us being one of the biggest brands on TikTok. Instagram, YouTube are still really important. Google and people browsing through the web in general. But honestly, our big bet is on being a truly omni-channel brand moving forward. We think that the biggest, most successful and genuinely most brilliant brands in the world have to be strong across all channels rather than just one or two. And you're right, we've had great success growing up on particular channels, particularly social. Now we want to be successful along them all.
Där träffade jag shorten med något.
If the US moved to ban TikTok, what would that mean for your business?
If the US was to ban TikTok, I think, listen, it would definitely affect us. But because of the fact that we are so invested in Google and Facebook, Instagram, and different companies like that, as well as the, omni-channel strategy.
Åpne poster åpne. Jeg short herfra. Her og her.
Then we think it should be.
Shorta hele dag.
And just moving the conversation on slightly, Ben, when it comes to manufacturing and people are going green, we're looking at sustainability. Are you investing in that? Where is Gymshark going when it comes to that look ahead in the future?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm heavily involved in this. I've literally spent the last few months traveling around different factories around the world. And we only really use US cotton. We use recycled polyesters and things like that. So we're becoming more sustainable than we've ever been. Every single season we get better and better. And to be honest, I think we probably just don't talk about it enough about how much progress that we have made from a sustainability point of view. But again, that will be coming in the next 12 months where we're really going to be talking about some of the great wins we've had from an eco perspective and the build of our product.
So I just want to sort of wrap up things with asking you, you are one of the youngest billionaires here in the UK. For anybody watching, looking to invest, looking to start a company, looking to start what you've done, what is your best advice to some of those people watching today?
I think my biggest piece of advice would be just to try something. And you're right, like people talk a lot about Gymshark because Gymshark was the success, but they forget about the 5, 6, 7 businesses that I started before Gymshark that failed.
I helvete, nå tar jeg gevinst, vårt øyeblikk.
Try again, because the likelihood of an entrepreneur's first idea or first business being a success is relatively low, and the learnings that you get from failure are absolutely great. So my advice would be follow your dream, do something you're really passionate about, but ultimately just keep pushing forward and trying new ideas.
Oh, Ben, what a lovely call to action to end it on, an inspiration for all the young folk listening. Ben Francis there, Gymshark CEO.
Nå henger det seg veldig på min PC da.
All right, coming up, the gold sector gets its biggest deal ever as Newmont buys new.
Jeg short herfra og herfra. Så nå er jeg veldig fin gevinst nå.
This is Bloomberg.
Han har støttenivå her. Det som er riktig å gjøre nå da, sånn riktig, er å ta gevinst nå, og vente på en ny breakout. Jeg er litt risk. Jeg er så tjukk i huet, altså. Jeg venter, jeg skal ha mer. Jeg forstår ikke hvorfor ikke det faller ned. Men jeg har en jævla fin gevinst. Så da tar jeg den nå. Den her oppe. Ute av den nå. Nå er jeg ute av den. Nå har jeg bare de to igjen.
What do you like most about your job? I think the people. I mean, ultimately we're a people business. A lot of what my job is as CEO of the company is to give those people sort of motivation, to tell them where we're going, to encourage them to come up and do their best work, to encourage them to collaborate. Sometimes you sort of think you're almost a psychologist.
Nå kommer det tall klokka 11. Nå tar jeg ut halvparten her nede. Den ene her tar jeg ut nå. Gevinst. Ute. Nå er den ute. Nå er bare en liten short igjen. Nå har jeg hatt to, for faen. Tar jeg gevinst på den ene her nå. Den her. Den er det som er der. Og ut av den også. Nå har jeg den der igjen. Og hvorfor jeg tar gevinst akkurat nå, men jeg tror du kan bryte ned, for det kommer tall klokka 11. Jeg skal ikke ha noe risiko klokka 11. Og så er PC-en min lagger, hvis dere kan se, så jeg vil ikke ta noen sjanser. Nå har jeg gjort det jævlig bra. Jeg har tjent bra med penger nå, på åpning. Nå skal jeg holde meg til regelen. Jeg har tjent masse penger nå. Og skal holde meg til regelen min. Hvis jeg holder meg til regelen min, så har jeg tjent 1 million i løpet av 2 måneder. Fra 0. Hvis jeg bare kan holde meg til regelen.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Danny Berger in London. Newmont has secured a deal to buy
Nei, Erik, jeg skal... Ja, for det hjalp ikke når jeg brukte Chrome og Edge, samme like lag. Samme driten. Det var ikke noen forskjell. Jeg skal trade USA etterpå. Så jeg kommer bare til å trade frem til 10-11 hver dag fra åpning på Daxen. Jeg kommer til å trade fra åpning i USA, og så skal jeg ikke ha... Jeg skal ikke trade på close mer mot USA. Kun regelen min. Jeg kunne godt sitte her og prate med dere og fortelle hvor det skal gå hen, liksom. Men jeg gidder ikke kjøre posisjoner.
The gap was pretty tight anyway, but there was a bit of a surprise last week when the company extended due diligence for Newmont.
Hvis jeg holder meg til regelen, så tjener jeg penger hver jævla dag. Hver eneste dag tjener jeg penger. Hver fuckings dag.
Ultimately, it just turned out that there was, it's just such a big deal that there was a lot of paperwork, a lot of volume to get through.
Hver dag. Hver jævla dag.
So, it got there eventually and a happy result for the shareholders that stuck with it. They're also going to get a franked dividend as well, which is like a tax-free dividend, a special kind of dividend at the end of this as well, if for those that stuck with it through the process.
Marius, snart. Jeg har igjen en trade som jeg skal ta nå.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely puts them just, purely back of the envelope scenario, well and truly the largest. I mean, the next largest is Barrick. It's going to be 60% larger than Barrick, probably.
Du kan få, hadde jeg... Den kan blowe rett ned nå, droppe nå. Den kan droppe noe veldig nå. Men det kommer makrotall klokka 11. Så jeg gidder ikke ta noen sjanser på det. Og så lagger PC-en min seg, så jeg får ikke gått sånn kjapt. Dessuten har jeg vært jævla flink. Jeg har gjort... I dag har jeg tradet... Jeg har gjort 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Jeg har gjort 14 transaksjoner og alle har gått i mål. Det er ikke dårlig det på under 2 timer. Er det så stor forskjell fra 8 til 11 enn fra 11 til 16 da? Ja, veldig stor forskjell.
Processes as well. So that should add and could really supercharge some of the existing Newmont assets as well globally.
Jeg har studert indekser nå nøye siden desember i fjor. Jeg vet nøyaktig hvordan det fungerer. Derfor så skal jeg gjøre akkurat planen min. Og da har jeg 1 million i løpet av 3 måneder. 2 måneder, 3 måneder. Hvis jeg kan sitte her uten å bli forstyrret at jeg må gå ut og handle midt på dagen og folk sitter her og prater med meg. Hvis jeg kan kun gjøre dette her, så skal jeg tjene 1 million med dere. Så bra, Marius.
Reserves and all reserves for production going forward in high quality jurisdictions with superb assets. People are going to be looking to those top tier players already rather than kind of junior explorers. So that puts more pressure on the top end of the barbell for bigger mergers going forward. But it will be hard to beat this for sure.
Okay, Harry, thank you very much. That's Harry Brumpton, our M&A reporter in Sydney. Now, Siemens Energy shares are higher this morning after the company upgraded its revenue expectation for the year with strong orders for energy transition technologies. Now, that comes despite the Spanish wind turbine business continuing to be problematic, with the company forecasting a deeper loss for that division. CEO Bloomberg that this will be a transitional year for the company, and we also asked him about the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act.
There's a continued strong demand also still for gas technologies. However, this is based on the capability to afterwards decarbonize these technologies and to convert them to hydrogen, where I think we are well positioned. And in that regard, the pleasure of the first half year, in particular of the last quarter, was that it's really was very balanced in terms of the order intake. You also have seen that we secured a large offshore wind project in the UK, which is also a good sign. It's the second largest offshore wind project which exists, and this is obviously a good trajectory also in wind, despite obviously the fact that we work through the problem.
To that point, we can't talk about wind turbines without talking about the Mesa. Obviously, some of the profitability issues there are still clear. What continues to be the biggest source of cost inflation, the biggest source of headaches when it comes to the supply chain for you?
You know, we knew that we're going to work, particularly on 23, through some of the remaining issues, and this is why we always said it's going to be a little bit volatile or bumpy ride throughout 23. 23 going to be a transitional year. It is nothing new in terms of what we're working through. It's really making sure that onshore recovers, that the startup of the new onshore platform gets more and more stable. They now go into operation. There's here and there obviously things to fix. Offshore is now ahead of a quite substantial ramp up. So we're hiring people, we're increasing factories, we need to get more output of the factories. So this is working through the matters. It's not substantially new, it's just working through it, and we're on it, and we always said it's not going to be done in a quarter. So you will need some patience with that and with us on that. And we also had, don't forget, a massive offshore auction period now, which is still coming in 2023 with big offshore orders. This will be on the order intake side also an interesting development.
Okay, the question is the patience of the market on the Gamesa side of the business for you. You used the word enormous grid building. Who is spending the most? Put some context around the word enormous grid growth. Is that in China? Is that in the Americas? Is that in Europe? Where is it and how much?
Yeah, we see it obviously now really starting across the board. Obviously, Europe had started relatively early with, let's say, long-term plans, and this is now coming to realization and implementation. So we see the biggest chunk of the order intake in Europe, a big chunk of that also in Germany. But we also now see other parts of the world coming up. We secured the first orders also on the HVDC connections in the US. We see the Middle East, interestingly enough, having more and more discussions in terms of how to interconnect countries, how to interconnect regions. And I would say a little bit coming later then is Asia, but discussions are happening at the moment everywhere globally. Europe will be the stronghold for 23 in this area for us, and we are well positioned there. But as I said, we continue to see changes elsewhere. And obviously, the IRA helps also to drive the element on the grid build out also in the US.
Siemens Energy CEO Christian Bruch speaking earlier to us. Now, coming up, traders brace for volatility after elections in Turkey and Thailand. We're going to look at what the results mean for currency markets. This is Bloomberg.
Ja, jeg har bare en minipost. Jeg har vært i gevinst nå 5 ganger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jeg gjør ikke noe mer nå for etterpå.
Would you say race relations in the United States are much better than when you were growing up in Mississippi, or do you think we've made less progress than you think we should have made?
Both. I think they're much better. Than when I was growing up. There's so many occupied areas, and I never thought I would see them in. but I would have hoped it would be better. It's been a lot of progress, and somehow we're in an era now where, in spite of the progress, race relations in certain areas has become very scary. You know, some of the things that one reads about now remind me of growing up in Mississippi.
Business Week Radio, live weekday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern.
We got a little bit of talking.
Come on, are you guys ready?
Harnessing the power of Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec bring you the latest news from the worlds of business, technology, politics,
Oppdatere PC-en din. Hvordan I all verden gjør det?
This is so exhausting and this is so all-encompassing.
Listen on Bloomberg Radio and streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals.
Jeg kan ingenting om PC, etter det.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Danny Berger in London. The knock-on effects of elections in Turkey and Thailand are already being seen in currency markets. There's said to be more uncertainty. Turkey is heading towards a runoff election, while Thai opposition parties have to try to form a government. Let's bring in Ben Ram on this, Bloomberg Markets Live cross-asset strategist. Ben, let's start with Turkey, because there's certainly a lot of volatility priced into this market. If we are heading to a runoff, what happens in the meantime? How do investors approach this market?
Well, it's a constrained market, Danny, for investors to be approaching the market, approaching the leader positioning just yet, because, as you know, there is heavy intervention in the currency from the Turkish central bank authorities, to the extent that we are talking about some 175 billion upwards in the past couple of years. In April alone, Bloomberg Economics suspects the interventions amounted to 30 billion. So that's humongous part of the market is taken up by the central bank. So there is heavy price distortion. How this price distortion plays out will depend on the second round vote runoff. If the opposition comes to power, then you would see the leader, unwind all the gains that it has seen because of the prop-up intervention. So the currency needs to come off the ventilator here, and the question is, when is it going to come off the ventilator?
Now, when it comes to Thailand, it's perhaps a little bit different, but the same sort of impulse. If we get this immediate market reaction, we see the baht advance, opposition parties on course to get that power back. How long-lasting is that strength? Because, of course, there's still some uncertainty in this market, too, in terms of how the final government looks.
Absolutely, Danny. I think that it'll take any time between a few weeks to a couple of months for the government to be in place, and what kind of a government will be ultimately formed, we're still up in the air. We don't know the contours of the new government yet. That uncertainty means that there may be short-term profit taking in the baht, but the baht, unlike the lira, is a fundamentally better placed currency simply because Thailand is an external creditor, and its economy is growing much better than the economists had forecast at the start of the year. So those two factors, and the fact that we are going to have a democratic government possibly in Thailand after a decade-long rule of military government, means that the fundamentals are in place for the baht to consolidate its gains and build on those gains perhaps later in the year.
Ben, thank you so much for joining us. What an interesting day when it comes to EMFX. Ben Ram there, Bloomberg Markets Live cross-asset strategist. All right, let's get you set up for the rest of the week and what we're watching. On Monday, we're going to get Eurozone industrial production figures. That'll be 10 a.m. UK time. Later in the day,
gevinst på shortmen nå. Se om det kan bryte ordentlig ned.
Tuesday, UK jobs data and US retail sales a few hours
Ute.
later. Wednesday, it's the latest Eurozone
Tatt gevinst nå.
figures. Also, BOE Governor Andrew Bailey speaks at a British Chamber of Commerce event. Thursday, Mexico's central bank decision.
Det kan falle mye mer, men nå ferdig. Klokka 11 ferdig.
So a lot to look forward to. Some inflation figures there after that Euro commission this morning, upgrading the view of inflation. Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition continues in the next hour and
Hva jævla fin den der, da.
in New York.
Om jeg så skal si det selv. Da har vi gjort det bra i dag, faktisk. Gjort det jævla bra. Så nå logger jeg av. Jeg vet at hvis jeg kommer til å sitte her nå, så kommer jeg til å trade, noe ikke jeg skal gjøre. Jeg kjenner meg selv såpass. Så jeg holder meg til reglene igjen. Klokka 11, jeg er ferdig. Jeg skal ha et møte klokken 12, så jeg kan ikke sitte her uansett. Og så er jeg tilbake klokka 3:30. Da trader vi Nasdaq. Om vi går short eller long, det kommer helt an på hvordan markedet er. Så er det liksom ikke noe gitt den ene eller andre veien. Så skal vi se, da er jeg tilbake klokka 3. Men det er bra, Fusion. Men la oss alle sammen, liksom, vi holder regelen, og så kan jeg nesten garantere at vi kommer til å tjene så inn i helvetes med mye penger i løpet av 2-3 måneder. Eller jeg skal få gjøre det. Da snakkes etterpå.